The metal floors of Colony Station Alpha 7 rang with the sound of footsteps as people moved through the lower levels. The air here was different from the upper decks. It was thicker, warmer, and carried the smell of cooking food and too many people living in small spaces. The walls were older here, painted gray many years ago, now showing rust spots and worn patches where countless hands had touched them. Keanu Reeves walked slowly through the narrow hallway, his long coat brushing against his legs with each step. At 193 years old, he still moved with the grace that had made him famous on Earth so many decades ago. His face showed his age, but his eyes remained sharp and kind. The life extension treatments had given him many extra years, but they could not stop time completely. He was visiting the station as part of his charity work. For over a century, Keanu had used his fame and money to help people across the human colonies. Today, he was supposed to meet with the station managers about funding for new medical equipment. But something made him take a wrong turn, or maybe it was not wrong at all that the sound reached him first. A slow, steady squeak of wheels turning. Then he heard the soft shuffle of feet moving carefully across the metal floor. Keanu stopped walking and listened. The sounds were coming from around the corner, in a part of the station he had never seen before. He turned the corner and saw something that made him stop breathing for a moment. An old man was pushing a large cart down the hallway. The cart was loaded with small packages wrapped in plain brown paper. The man looked to be in his 90s, though Keanu knew that meant little in an age of life extension technology. Some people chose to age naturally, while others used treatments to stay young, but this man looked truly old. His back was bent from years of hard work. His hands, gripping the cart handles, were thin and showed the dark spots of advanced age. His hair was white and thin, combed neatly, but unable to hide the pink scalp beneath. He wore simple clothes that had been washed many times and were starting to fray at the edges. What struck Keanu most was not how the man looked, but how he moved. Every step seemed difficult. The old man would push the cart forward a few feet, then stop to rest. His breathing was heavy, and Keanu could see sweat on his forehead. Despite the cool air in the lower levels, the man did not notice Keanu watching. He was focused on his task, moving the cart toward a doorway marked with the number 847. He stopped at the door and picked up one of the brown packages. His hands shook slightly as he held it. The door opened before the old man could knock. "Ah!" Young woman appeared, holding a small child in her arms. Her face lit up when she saw the old man. "Frank," she said, her voice full of warmth, "you did not have to come today. I heard you were not feeling well." The old man smiled, and his whole face changed. The tiredness seemed to fade away, replaced by genuine joy. "I am fine, Betty. How is little Danny today?" The woman shifted the child in her arms. "He is better. The medicine you brought last week helped a lot." Frank handed her the package. "This has some extra protein bars today. Growing boys need good food." Betty tried to give him something in return, but Frank waved his hand. "Keep your credits, dear. You need them more than I do." Keanu watched this scene with growing amazement. He had seen many acts of kindness in his long life, but there was something special about this moment. The way the old man ignored his own obvious pain to help others touch something deep in Keanu's heart. Frank continued down the hallway, stopping at door after door. At each one, the same scene played out. Families would greet him with smiles and thanks. He would hand them packages of food, medicine, or sometimes just small toys for the children. And at every door, he would refuse any payment. Keanu followed at a distance, staying in the shadows. He watched Frank visit 12 different families. With each stop, the old man seemed to grow more tired. By the time he reached the last door, Frank was leaning heavily on his cart, just to stay upright. The final door opened to reveal an elderly woman using a walking stick. She looked almost as old as Frank. But where his eyes were bright with purpose, hers were cloudy with cataracts. "Is that you, Frank?" she asked, squinting into the hallway. "Yes, Martha, I have your medicine today." The woman's face crumpled with relief. "Oh, thank goodness. I was so worried. I heard the pharmacy was charging double now." Frank handed her a small bottle of pills. "Do not worry about the cost. Just take one with food each morning." "But Frank, how can you afford all this? You are just one person, and there are so many of us who need help." Frank straightened his bent back as much as he could. "We are all in this together, Martha. When I have something to give, I give it. When I need help, good people like you would help me too." After Martha closed her door, Frank stood alone in the hallway. Keanu watched as the old man's shoulders sagged with exhaustion. Frank looked down at his empty cart and sighed deeply. Then he began the long journey back, pushing the empty cart toward wherever he had started his rounds. Keanu felt a strange mixture of emotions as he watched Frank disappear around a corner. He had seen poverty before, and he had seen kindness before, but he had never seen someone give so much of themselves while having so little to give. Questions filled his mind. Who was this old man? Where did he get the food and medicine he was giving away? How long had he been doing this? And most importantly, why was no one helping him? Keanu had come to the station to write a check for medical equipment. It was the kind of charity he had been doing for decades. Write a check, take some pictures, make some speeches, and move on to the next cause. But something about Frank made him want to do more. He made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going to his scheduled meeting, Keanu turned and followed the path Frank had taken. He needed to know more about this remarkable old man who pushed a cart through the forgotten corners of the station, bringing hope to people who had been forgotten by everyone else. The sound of squeaking wheels echoed in the distance, and Keanu Reeves, one of the most famous men in human space, began his own journey into the depths of Colony Station Alpha 7. Keanu could not sleep that night. He lay in his comfortable bed in the station's luxury hotel, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Frank, the image of the old man pushing his cart. Stopping to rest every few steps would not leave his mind. He had met many people in his long life, but something about Frank was different. The next morning, Keanu canceled all his meetings. His assistant, Ben Martinez, was confused. Keanu never canceled meetings, especially important ones about charity. "Work, sir. The station managers are expecting you," Ben said, checking his tablet. "The medical equipment donation is a big deal for them." "The equipment can wait," Keanu replied. "I need you to find someone for me, a young woman who works with computer records. Someone who can look up information about people." Ben raised his eyebrows but did not ask questions. After working with Keanu for 20 years, he had learned that his boss sometimes had unusual requests. Within 2 hours, Ben had found Lisa Chang. Lisa was 28 years old and worked in the station's data center. She was small and quiet, with thick glasses and fingers that moved quickly over computer keyboards. She specialized in finding information that other people thought was lost forever. When Keanu met Lisa in a small coffee shop on the station's middle level, she was nervous. Meeting one of the most famous people in human space was not something that happened every day. "I need your help with something important," Keanu said, sitting across from her at a small table. "There is an old man on this station. His name is Frank. I think his last name might be Miller. I need to know everything about him." Lisa pushed her glasses up her nose. "What kind of information do you want?" "Everything. Where he came from, what he used to do, why he is here. But I want you to be careful. Do not let anyone know you are looking." Lisa's fingers were already itching to start typing. She loved puzzles, and finding lost information was her favorite kind of puzzle. "I can start looking today, but it might take some time. Records from the old days are not always easy to find." "Take all the time you need," Keanu said. Just find out who Frank Miller really is. For 3 days, Lisa worked on the mystery. She searched through military records, civilian databases, and old news reports. She followed digital trails that led from Colony Station Alpha 7 to Earth, then out to the frontier worlds where humans had fought their first wars with alien species. On the 4th day, Lisa called Keanu with excitement in her voice. "I found him," she said. "You need to see this." They met in Lisa's small office in the data center. Computer screens covered every wall, showing charts, documents, and photographs. Lisa pointed to the largest screen, which showed the image of a much younger Frank Miller in a military uniform. "His full name is Colonel Frank Miller," Lisa said. "He is 89 years old, not 90 like he looks. He fought in the Centauri Wars 40 years ago." Keanu studied the photograph. The young soldier in the picture stood straight and proud, his uniform covered with medals. It was hard to believe this was the same bent old man he had seen pushing a cart through the station's lower levels. "What happened to him?" Keanu asked. Lisa pulled up more documents. "He was a hero, Mr. Reeves. A real hero. Look at this." The screen showed a battle report from the planet Kepler 442b. Keanu read the words slowly, his amazement growing with each line. Frank Miller had held off an entire alien attack force for 3 days while civilians evacuated from a colony town. He had been wounded 4 times but refused to leave his position. His actions had saved over 10,000 people. "This is incredible," Keanu said. "He should be famous. There should be statues of him. Why have I never heard this story?" Lisa's expression grew sad, because the mission was classified. The government did not want people to know how close we came to losing that colony. Frank's heroics were buried in secret files. But surely he was rewarded. Medals, money, recognition. Lisa shook her head. "That is where it gets worse. Look at this." She showed him another document, this one marked with red warnings about errors in the system. There was a computer mistake 20 years ago. Someone entered the wrong code in Frank's file. Instead of showing him as a decorated war hero, the system labeled him as a supply clerk who never saw combat. Keanu felt anger building in his chest. "You mean they made a mistake and no one fixed it?" "Frank tried to fix it. He filed appeals for years. But the bureaucrats kept saying his records were correct and he was lying about his service. Eventually, they reduced his veteran benefits to almost nothing." Lisa pulled up Frank's current financial records. Keanu was shocked by what he saw. Frank received barely enough money each month to pay for a tiny apartment and basic food. There was nothing left over for medicine, new clothes, or any of the small comforts that made life bearable. "How does he afford all the food and medicine he gives away?" Keanu asked. "He does not eat much," Lisa said quietly. "I checked the medical records. Dr. Amy Watson at the station's medical bay has been treating him for malnutrition and exhaustion. She says he comes in every few weeks, barely able to stand." Keanu was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. A war hero who had saved thousands of lives was slowly killing himself to help his neighbors, while the government that should have been taking care of him had forgotten he existed. "There is more," Lisa said. "I found out where he gets the supplies." She showed him security footage from the station's loading docks. The video showed Frank arriving early each morning, before the sun came up. He would wait by the garbage areas, where food suppliers threw away products that were close to their expiration dates. "He dumpster dives," Lisa explained. "He takes food that stores were going to throw away and redistributes it to families who need it. Sometimes he uses his own money to buy medicine from the discount pharmacy." Keanu watched the video of Frank, carefully sorting through discarded food packages, checking each one to make sure it was still safe to eat. The old man worked slowly but methodically, his movements showing years of practice. "How long has he been doing this?" Keanu asked. Least 10 years, maybe longer. I found records of him helping families going back to when he first arrived on the station. Keanu stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see the upper levels of the station, where wealthy people like himself lived in comfort. Below, in the areas he could not see, Frank was probably starting his daily rounds, pushing his cart from door to door, despite his failing health. "Dr. Watson," Keanu said suddenly. "You mentioned a doctor who's been treating Frank. I want to talk." To her, Lisa nodded. "I can arrange that. But Mr. Reeves, what are you planning to do?" Keanu turned back to face her. "I am not sure yet. But I know that what happened to Frank Miller is not just a single mistake. If it happened to him, it probably happened to other veterans too. Good people are falling through cracks in the system. And no one is paying attention." He looked at the photograph of young Colonel Miller one more time. Frank Miller saved 10,000 lives 40 years ago. Now he is saving lives one family at a time, and no one knows. That is going to change. Lisa could see the determination in Keanu's eyes. She had heard stories about what happened when Keanu Reeves decided to fix something. Usually, the whole galaxy ended up talking about it. "What do you need me to do?" She asked. "Keep digging," Keanu said. "Find out how many other veterans are in Frank's situation. I have a feeling this story is much bigger than just one forgotten hero." As Keanu left Lisa's office, his mind was already working on a plan. But first, he needed to talk to Dr. Watson and learn more about Frank's health. Time might be running out for the old soldier, and Keanu was determined not to let another hero die forgotten and alone. Dr. Amy Watson was surprised when Keanu Reeves walked into her medical office. The medical bay was a small, crowded place in the station's middle section. It was not the kind of place where famous people usually visited. "Mr. Reeves," she said, standing up quickly from her desk. "I was not expecting you. Is everything all right?" Keanu sat down in the chair across from her desk. Dr. Watson was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and tired hands. Her office was filled with medical equipment that looked old but well maintained. Pictures of smiling patients covered one wall. "I want to talk to you about one of your patients," Keanu said. "Frank Miller." Dr. Watson's face changed. She sat back down and folded her hands on her desk. "I cannot discuss patient information with you, Mr. Reeves, even if you are famous." "I understand," Keanu said. "But I am not asking as a curious person. I am asking as someone who wants to help Frank." Dr. Watson studied Keanu's face for a long moment. She had been a doctor for 30 years and had learned to read people well. She could see that Keanu was sincere. "What do you know about Frank?" she asked. "I know he's a war hero who has been forgotten by the system. I know he spends his days helping other people while his own health is failing. And I know that you have been taking care of him without him being able to pay much." Dr. Watson sighed deeply. "Frank Miller is one of the most stubborn patients I have ever had. He comes in here exhausted, malnourished, and sometimes barely able to walk. I tell him to rest, to eat more, to stop pushing himself so hard. But he never listens. How bad is his health? Bad enough that he should be in a care facility, not pushing heavy carts around the station. His heart is weak, his joints are painful, and he weighs 30 pounds less than he should. But every time I suggest he slow down, he tells me about some family that needs help." Dr. Watson opened a file on her computer. "Last week, he collapsed in the hallway outside the pharmacy. A security guard brought him to me. His blood sugar was dangerously low because he had not eaten in 2 days. When I asked him why, he said he had used his food money to buy medicine for a sick child." Keanu felt his anger growing again. What can be done to help him? Frank needs proper nutrition, regular medical care, and most importantly, he needs to stop working so hard. But he refuses to accept charity. He says other people need help more than he does. What if the help did not come from charity? What if it came from the government finally giving him what he earned. Dr. Watson looked interested. You mean his military benefits? That and more, but I need to know how much time we have. If I can fix his situation, will his health improve? Dr. Watson was quiet for a moment. If Frank gets proper care soon, yes, he could live many more years. But if he continues like this, pushing himself beyond his limits. She did not finish the sentence, but Keanu understood. When Keanu left the medical bay, he had a new sense of urgency. Frank Miller was not just a forgotten hero. He was a dying hero, and time was running out. That evening, Keanu called a meeting in his hotel suite. Ben Martinez was there, along with Lisa Chang and 2 other people Keanu trusted. Carol Hughes was Keanu's legal advisor, a sharp woman who had helped him navigate complex charity work for decades. Jake Roberts was a former news reporter who now worked as Keanu's media consultant. I need your help with something big, Keanu told them. Bigger than anything we have done before. He explained Frank's situation, showing them the military records Lisa had found and the medical information Dr. Watson had shared. As he spoke, he could see the emotions on their faces change from curiosity to anger to determination. This is terrible, Carol said, but it is also not unusual. I have seen hundreds of cases like this over the years. The bureaucracy is broken, and veterans are suffering. How many cases? Keanu asked. Lisa pulled up information on her tablet. I have been researching like you asked. In the past week, I have found over 300 veterans in similar situations, just in this star system. Men and women who served with honor, but are now living in poverty because of computer errors, lost paperwork, or bureaucratic indifference. Jake leaned forward in his chair. This could be a huge story. If we can document even a fraction of these cases, we could force the government to make changes. But we need to be careful, Carol warned. These people have already been hurt by the system. We do not want to make things worse for them. Keanu stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the stars shone brightly in the darkness of space. Somewhere out there were hundreds of colony worlds, each with their own forgotten heroes struggling to survive. I do not want to just tell a story, he said. I want to fix the problem. All of it. Ben looked confused. What do you mean? Keanu turned back to face the group. I mean, I want to create a solution that works for Frank and for every other veteran in his situation. I want to build something that will make sure this never happens again. Carol shook her head. Keanu, that would require changing laws across dozens of worlds. It would cost billions of credits and take years to implement. Then we better get started, Keanu said with a smile. Over the next several hours, they worked out the basics of a plan. It was ambitious, maybe impossible, but it was also the right thing to do. The plan had 3 parts. First, they would secretly document Frank's daily routine and the community he served. Jake would coordinate with a small team of reporters to create a powerful visual story that would show the world what real heroism looked like. Second, Lisa would expand her research to create a comprehensive database of forgotten veterans. They would trace the bureaucratic failures that had created these problems and identify exactly what needed to be changed. Third, and most importantly, they would coordinate a massive revelation that would force the government to act. But this revelation had to be done carefully in a way that honored Frank's dignity and respected his privacy. The key, Keanu explained, is that Frank cannot know what we are doing. If he finds out we are helping him, he will try to stop us. He will say that other people need help more than he does. Carol was taking notes on her tablet. We will need to involve some very powerful people. Government officials, military leaders, maybe even the Colonial Council. I have contacts, Keanu said. People who owe me favors from charity work over the years, but we need to be smart about this. We get one chance to make this work. Jake was already thinking about the media aspects. We need to time this perfectly. The story has to hit all the major news networks at the same time, with maximum impact. And we need to have solutions ready, Ben added. We cannot just point out the problems. We need to show people how to fix them. Lisa looked up from her tablet. I have been thinking about the technical side. If we can create a new computer system for tracking veteran benefits, we could prevent most of these errors from happening in the future. How long do we have? Carol asked. Keanu thought about his conversation with Dr. Watson. Frank's health is getting worse. If we are going to do this, we need to move fast. I want everything ready in 2 weeks. The group looked at each other with a mixture of excitement and fear. 2 weeks was not much time to plan something this big. But they all knew that Frank Miller could not wait much longer. There is one more thing, Keanu said. This plan only works if we can get Frank to a place where he can be honored properly. We need to create a situation where he will accept recognition without feeling like he is taking resources away from other people. How do we do that? Ben asked. Keanu smiled. We make him think he is helping other people. We tell him he is being honored as a representative of all forgotten veterans. He will accept recognition if he believes it will help others in his situation. Carol nodded slowly. That could work. But we need to make sure we can actually help those other veterans too. We will, Keanu said. That is the whole point. Frank Miller is not just one man. He is a symbol of everything that is wrong with how we treat our heroes. When we fix his situation, we fix the system for everyone. As the meeting ended, each person had their assignments. Lisa would continue building the database of forgotten veterans. Jake would coordinate with media contacts. Carol would begin working on the legal framework for new veteran support laws. Ben would handle the logistics of the Revelation event. And Keanu would do the hardest job of all. He would continue watching Frank Miller push his cart through the station corridors, knowing that every day made the old soldier weaker. While pretending he did not have the power to help, the next 2 weeks would determine whether they could save not just one forgotten hero, but thousands of others like him. The clock was ticking, and failure was not an option. 2 weeks later, Frank Miller stood in front of his small bathroom mirror, trying to make his old uniform look presentable. The community leaders had convinced him to attend what they called a simple ceremony to honor local volunteers. Frank did not want to go, but Betty and the other families he helped had insisted. It is just a small thing, Betty had told him the day before. The station manager wants to give awards to people who help their neighbors. You deserve recognition, Frank. Frank had tried to refuse, but the families would not take no for an honor. Frank had tried to refuse. Answer. They had even pulled their credits to buy him a new shirt for the occasion. Looking at himself in the mirror, Frank straightened his thin shoulders and tried to look dignified. The ceremony was supposed to be held in the community center on level 5, a place Frank rarely visited. As he made his way there, pushing his cart one last time that morning to deliver food to 3 families, he wondered how many people would actually attend. Probably just a few neighbors and maybe a local official or two. When Frank arrived at the community center, he was surprised to see how many people were gathered outside. There were families he recognized from his daily rounds, but also many faces he did not know. Some were holding signs with words like, "Thank you, Frank," and "Heroes live among us." Betty appeared at his side, taking his arm gently. "Come on, Frank. Everyone is waiting for you." Inside the community center, Frank was amazed to see that every seat was filled. The small stage at the front was decorated with flowers and banners. Frank felt nervous and out of place among so many people. A local community leader named Paul Davis walked onto the stage. Frank knew Paul slightly. He was a good man who organized charity drives for the lower levels. "Ladies and gentlemen," Paul said into a microphone, "thank you all for coming today. We are here to honor someone very special. Someone who has spent years helping his neighbors without asking for anything in return. Frank shifted uncomfortably in his front row seat. He had not expected so many people to care about his small efforts to help a few families. Frank Miller, Paul continued, has shown us what it means to be a true neighbor. Despite his own challenges, he has made sure that no family in our community goes hungry or lacks medicine when they need it most. The audience began to clap, and Frank felt his face grow red with embarrassment. He looked around and saw many faces he recognized, children, whose families he had helped, elderly people he had brought medicine to, parents who had received food packages during difficult times. But before we give Frank his well-deserved recognition, Paul said, I have been told that some very special guests would like to say a few words. Frank looked confused. What special guests could there be at a simple community ceremony? The lights in the room dimmed slightly, and a spotlight appeared on the stage. Frank heard footsteps, and his heart nearly stopped when he saw who was walking onto the stage. Admiral Susan Bradley, the highest-ranking military officer in the Colonial Defense Force, stepped up to the microphone. She was wearing her full dress, uniform covered with ribbons and medals. Frank had only seen her in news reports before. Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Bradley said, her voice carrying clearly through the room, I am here today to correct a terrible mistake that has gone on. For far too long, Frank gripped the arms of his chair. His mind was racing, trying to understand what was happening. 40 years ago, the Admiral continued, a young soldier named Frank Miller saved the lives of over 10,000 civilians on the planet Kepler 442b. For 3 days and 3 nights, he held off an enemy force that should have overwhelmed him. He was wounded 4 times but refused to leave his position. The room was completely silent. Frank felt like he could not breathe. Frank Miller should have received the highest honors our military can give. Instead, due to classified mission requirements and later bureaucratic errors, his heroism was buried in secret files. Today, that changes. Admiral Bradley gestured toward the back of the room. Mr. President, would you please join us? Frank turned in his seat and saw President Richard Stone of the Terran Colonial Council walking down the aisle. The president of all the human colonies was here, in this small community center, looking directly at him. This cannot be real, Frank whispered to himself. President Stone took the microphone from Admiral Bradley. Frank Miller, he said, you are not just a hero of 40 years ago. You are a hero today. While our government failed to recognize your service, you never stopped serving. You took care of your community with your own hands, your own sacrifice, and your own big heart. Frank was trembling now. Betty reached over and took his hand, squeezing it gently. But there is someone else here who wants to speak to you, President, Stone said. Someone who discovered your story and made sure the world would finally know the truth. The spotlight moved to the side of the stage, and Frank saw a familiar figure step into the light. Keanu Reeves walked slowly to the microphone. His kind eyes focused on Frank. Hello, Frank, Keanu said softly. I have been watching you for the past few weeks. I have seen you push your cart through the station corridors, stopping to help anyone who needs it. I have seen you give away food when you barely have enough for yourself. I have seen you deliver medicine to sick children and comfort elderly neighbors. Keanu paused, and Frank could see tears in the famous man's eyes. What I saw was not just kindness, Keanu continued. What I saw was the same courage you showed 40 years ago on Kepler 442b, the same willingness to sacrifice yourself for others, the same heroic heart. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Frank Miller, you never stopped being a soldier. You just changed your battlefield from a distant planet to the corridors of this station. You traded your rifle for a food cart, but you kept fighting for the people who needed protection. Admiral Bradley stepped forward again, carrying a small wooden box. "Colonel Frank Miller," she said formally, "by the authority of the Colonial Defense Force and the Terran Colonial Council, I present you with the Distinguished Service Cross, the highest honor we can give." Frank tried to stand, but his legs would not support him. Ben Martinez, who had been sitting nearby, quietly helped him to his feet. With shaking hands, Frank accepted the medal. The weight of it seemed impossible, not just the physical weight, but the weight of 40 years of waiting, of being forgotten, of believing that no one remembered or cared about what he had done. "There is more," President Stone said. "Frank, your story has shown us how many veterans have been failed by our system. Today, I am signing the Frank Miller Veteran Support Act, which will completely reform how we take care of the men and women who have served our colonies." The president held up an official document. "This law will create new systems to prevent the errors that happened to you. It will provide better benefits, better medical care, and better support for all veterans. Your suffering will make sure that other heroes never have to go through what you have experienced." Frank looked out at the audience and realized that many people were crying. These were not tears of sadness, but tears of joy and pride. He saw children he had helped, parents he had fed, elderly neighbors he had cared for. They were all here, all part of this moment, but the biggest surprise was still coming. Keanu stepped back to the microphone. "Frank, you have spent your life serving others. Today, others want to serve you. But more than that, we want to serve alongside you." Keanu gestured to the back of the room, where a large screen had been set up. The screen showed images of Colony Station Alpha 7, but not the parts Frank knew. It showed the upper levels, the wealthy areas, the places where important people lived. "This ceremony is being broadcast throughout human space," Keanu said. "Right now, billions of people are watching and learning about Frank Miller. They are seeing what real heroism looks like." Frank felt dizzy. Billions of people? This simple ceremony was being seen by the entire human colonial network. "And they are responding," Keanu continued. "In the past hour, volunteer organizations on 300 worlds have contacted us, wanting to start their own programs to help forgotten veterans and struggling families." The screen showed images from other colonies, people organizing food drives, medical clinics opening their doors to veterans, government officials promising to review veteran benefit cases. "Frank Miller," Keanu said, his voice filled with emotion, "you thought you were just helping a few families on one space station. But your example has inspired the entire human race to be better." Frank looked around the room at all the faces watching him. These were not just his neighbors anymore. Through the cameras broadcasting the ceremony, they were representatives of billions of humans across the galaxy, all touched by the simple story of an old man who refused to let his neighbors go hungry. Admiral Bradley stepped forward one more time. "Colonel Miller, you have already served beyond the call of duty. But if you are willing, your colonies need you to serve once more. Will you help us make sure this new veteran support system works the way it should?" Frank looked at the medal in his hands, then at the faces of the people who had supported him, and finally at Keanu, who had somehow made all of this possible. With a voice that was stronger than it had been in years, Frank Miller said the only thing he could say, "Yes, sir. I am ready to serve." The ceremony should have ended there. Frank had received his medal, the new law had been announced, and the whole galaxy was watching. But Keanu Reeves was not finished. He had one more surprise that no one, not even his own team, was expecting. As the applause died down and people began to think the event was over, Keanu stepped back to the microphone. His face showed a determination that made everyone in the room pay attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Keanu said, "what we have done today is important. We have honored a hero and created new laws to help veterans. But laws and ceremonies are just words and papers. Real change requires real action." Frank was still holding his medal, trying to understand everything that had happened. He looked up at Keanu with confusion and gratitude mixed together on his face. For the past 2 weeks, Keanu continued, I have been learning about Frank Miller. I have watched him push his cart through these corridors every day, bringing food and medicine to families who need help. I have seen him collapse from exhaustion, because he cares more about others than himself. The room was completely quiet. Even President Stone and Admiral Bradley looked curious about what Keanu would say next. I have also learned something else. Frank Miller is not alone. There are thousands of veterans across human space who have been forgotten by the system. Men and women who served with honor but now struggle to survive. Heroes who continue to help their communities even when no one helps them. Keanu paused and looked directly at Frank. This cannot continue. We cannot have ceremonies and give speeches while good people suffer. We need to do more than just change laws. We need to change how we treat each other. Lisa Chang, watching from the back of the room, felt her heart start beating faster. She recognized the look on Keanu's face. He was about to do something big. Therefore, Keanu said, I am making an announcement that I hope will shock the conscience of humanity. He turned to face the cameras that were broadcasting to billions of people across the galaxy. I am donating my entire personal fortune to create the Miller Foundation. This foundation will support forgotten veterans and fund community food programs on every human world. Gasps filled the room. Ben Martinez, Keanu's assistant, looked like he was about to faint. Keanu had not discussed this with anyone. My fortune is worth approximately 47 billion credits, Keanu continued. It has been accumulated over nearly 2 centuries of work and investments. Today, all of it will be used to make sure that no veteran ever lives in poverty again, and no family ever goes hungry. President Stone stood up from his chair, his mouth open in amazement. Admiral Bradley was staring at Keanu like he had lost his mind. Carol Hughes, Keanu's legal advisor, was frantically taking notes on her tablet, but Keanu was not finished with his surprises. However, money alone will not solve this problem. The issue is not just lack of resources. The issue is that we have forgotten how to take care of each other. We have become so focused on our own lives that we ignore the suffering of our neighbors. Keanu stepped away from the microphone and walked down from the stage. He stopped directly in front of Frank, who was looking up at him with wide eyes. Frank Miller, Keanu said, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear, you have shown me what real service looks like. You have taught me that heroism is not about grand gestures or public recognition. It is about the daily choice to help others, even when it costs you everything. Keanu knelt down so he was at eye level with Frank, who was still sitting in his chair. I want to learn from you. I want to serve alongside you. So I am asking for your permission to do something that many people will think is crazy. Frank found his voice. What do you want to do? Keanu smiled. I want to push food carts with you, every day. For the next year, the room exploded with shocked voices. People were talking over each other, trying to understand what they had just heard. One of the richest and most famous men in human space wanted to spend a year pushing food carts through the poor sections of a space station. Sir, Ben Martinez called out from the audience, surely you do not mean literally. Keanu stood up and faced the crowd. I mean exactly what I said. Tomorrow morning, I will be here with Frank, loading up food carts and delivering supplies to families who need help. I will do this every day for 1 year. Jake Roberts, the media consultant, was frantically making notes. This was the biggest story of his career, and it was happening without any planning or preparation. Furthermore, Keanu continued, I challenge every person who is watching this broadcast to join us. Not with money, though donations to the Miller Foundation will be welcome. Join us with your time, your energy, your hands. The cameras broadcasting the ceremony zoomed in on Keanu's face as he spoke directly to the billions of people watching. If you are a government official, spend 1 day a month delivering food to poor families. If you are a business owner, use your resources to help veterans in your community. If you are a teacher, a doctor, a farmer, or anything else, find a way to serve the people around you. Keanu turned back to Frank. Frank, what do you think? Will you teach an old actor how to be a real hero? Frank looked around the room at all the faces staring at him. He thought about the past 40 years of his life, the war, the bureaucratic mistakes, the years of struggling alone, the daily choice to help his neighbors despite his own pain. Mr. Reeves, Frank said slowly, pushing food carts is hard work. The supplies are heavy, the corridors are long, and some days the families you help cannot even say thank you because they are too tired or too proud. I understand, Keanu replied. The pay is nothing. The recognition is nothing. Most days, nobody notices what you do or cares about the difference you make. I understand, Keanu said again. Frank was quiet for a moment, looking at this famous man who was willing to give up everything to help people he had never met. But, Frank said, his voice growing stronger, it is the most important work in the universe. If you really want to do this, then yes, I will teach you. The room erupted in applause again, but this time it was different. This was not polite ceremony applause. This was the sound of people who had just witnessed something extraordinary. Over the next hour, as the ceremony officially ended and people began to leave, something amazing started happening. Representatives from news organizations across the galaxy were reporting that their communication systems were being flooded with messages from people who wanted to volunteer. On the Colony World New Boston, the mayor announced that the city government would dedicate 1 day each week to community service. On Mars Station 3, a group of wealthy business owners formed a committee to identify and help struggling veterans. On Earth, in the same Hollywood where Keanu had started his career centuries ago, actors and directors were organizing food drives, but the most surprising response came from the military itself. Admiral Bradley received a communication from fleet commanders across human space. Thousands of active duty soldiers were requesting permission to spend their leave time helping in veteran support programs. As Frank and Keanu left the community center together, followed by a crowd of reporters and cameras, Frank asked a question that had been bothering him. Mr. Reeves, why are you really doing this? You could have just written a check and moved on to the next charity project. Why give up your whole fortune? Why spend a year pushing carts? Keanu was quiet for a moment as they walked slowly toward the transport that would take them to Frank's neighborhood. Frank, he said finally, I have been alive for almost 200 years. I have made movies, earned money, met famous people, and traveled to every world humans have colonized. But I have never done anything that mattered as much as what you do every day. He stopped walking and looked at Frank seriously. You saved 10,000 lives in a war 40 years ago. But you have been saving lives every day since then, one family at a time. I want to learn how to do that. I want to matter the way you matter. Frank nodded slowly. Tomorrow morning we start at 5 o'clock. The supply dock opens early, and we need to sort through the donations before the families wake up. I will be there, Keanu said. As they reached Frank's small apartment, Frank turned to Keanu one more time. You know this will not be easy, right? People will call you crazy. They will say you are wasting your life and your money. Keanu smiled. Frank, I have been called crazy before. Usually, those were the times when I was doing something right. That night, as Frank lay in his small bed holding his medal, he thought about the strange turn his life had taken. Tomorrow, one of the most famous people in the galaxy would be learning to push a food cart. The story would be told on every world, inspiring others to serve their communities. But Frank was not thinking about the fame or the impact on human civilization. He was thinking about the families he would visit tomorrow, and how good it would feel to have help carrying the heavy supplies. For the first time in years, Frank Miller fell asleep with a smile on his face. 6 months had passed since the ceremony that changed everything. The early morning alarm in Frank Miller's small apartment rang at 4:30, just like it did every day. But now, instead of getting ready alone, Frank could hear movement in the apartment next door. Keanu had moved into the tiny space beside Frank's, turning down offers for luxury accommodations on the upper levels of the station. Frank got dressed slowly, his movements easier now than they had been in years. The regular meals, proper medical care, and help with the heavy lifting had improved his health dramatically. Dr. Watson said his heart was stronger and he had gained back 15 pounds of healthy weight. At 5 o'clock sharp, Frank heard a gentle knock on his door. When he opened it, Keanu was standing there in simple work clothes, his famous face showing the tiredness that came from months of physical labor. "Good morning, Frank," Keanu said with a smile. "Ready for another day of changing the world?" Frank chuckled. After 6 months of working together, Keanu's enthusiasm still amazed him. "You say that every morning." "Because it is true every morning," Keanu replied. They walked together toward the supply dock, their footsteps echoing in the quiet corridors. The station was different now. The lower levels had been cleaned and repaired. New medical clinics had opened. Food distribution centers operated on every level. The changes were visible everywhere. At the supply dock, they were joined by 12 other volunteers. The group included Betty, the young mother Frank had been helping for years, who now coordinated volunteer schedules. There was also Marcus Thompson, a retired engineer who had started coming after seeing the ceremony broadcast. Dr. Watson volunteered 2 mornings a week, using her medical knowledge to identify families who needed extra help. But the most surprising regular volunteer was Admiral Bradley herself. Once a month, she would arrive at the station and spend 3 days working alongside Frank and Keanu, the sight of the highest military officer in human space pushing a food cart had become one of the most shared images across the galaxy. "How many families are we visiting today?" asked Linda Park, a teacher who had organized other educators to help during school breaks. Frank checked his list. 37 families for regular deliveries, plus we need to check on the Johnson family. Their youngest daughter was sick last week. The work had become more organized over the months, but it had not lost its personal touch. Frank still insisted on visiting each family personally, learning about their needs and treating them with dignity and respect. As they loaded the carts with food, medicine, and supplies, Keanu marveled at how much had changed. The supply dock now received donations from across the galaxy. Ships arrived weekly with contributions from other colonies, all inspired by Frank's story. "Frank," Keanu said as they secured boxes to his cart, "have you seen the latest reports from Lisa?" Lisa Chang had become the unofficial coordinator of what people now called the Cart Brigade movement. Her research had identified over 50,000 forgotten veterans across human space, and programs to help them had started on 300 worlds. "She found 1,200 more veterans this week," Frank replied. "Most of them have been living in poverty for years, just like I was." "But not anymore," said Marcus, joining their conversation. "The Miller Foundation processed over 8,000 benefit corrections last month alone." The foundation that bore Frank's name had grown beyond anything Keanu had originally imagined. It employed thousands of people whose only job was to find forgotten veterans and restore their proper benefits. It also funded community support programs, medical clinics, and food distribution networks on every human world. As they began their daily rounds, Frank and Keanu fell into the comfortable rhythm they had developed over the months. Frank would approach each door first, greeting the families with his gentle manner. Keanu would follow, carrying supplies and learning from Frank's example of how to treat people with respect and kindness. Their first stop was apartment 847, where Betty used to live before getting a better job coordinating volunteers. The apartment was now home to the Martinez family, refugees from a mining accident on the frontier world Kepler 438c. "Good morning, Mrs. Martinez," Frank said when the door opened. "How is Carlos feeling today?" Mrs. Martinez smiled broadly. "Much better, thanks. To the medicine Dr. Watson provided. And the children loved the books you brought last week." As they delivered supplies and checked on the family's needs, Frank noticed something that filled him with pride. Mrs. Martinez was preparing her own cart, loaded with small packages. "Are you starting deliveries too?" Frank asked. "Yes, Mrs. Martinez replied. "There are 3 new families on level 2 who just arrived from the outer colonies. I want to make sure they know someone cares about them." This was happening everywhere. People who had been helped by the cart brigade were starting their own service projects. The movement was growing organically, spreading from person to person, family to family, world to world. After completing their morning rounds, Frank and Keanu returned to the community center for their weekly planning meeting. The small room where Frank had once received his medal was now the headquarters for the largest volunteer organization in human space. Lisa Chang was waiting for them with reports and updates displayed on multiple screens. "The latest numbers are incredible," she said. "We now have active cart brigade programs on 423 worlds. Over 2 million people have volunteered at least once." Ben Martinez, who had become the Foundation's operations manager, added more good news. "The government efficiency reforms are working too. Veteran benefit processing time has been reduced from years to weeks. We have corrected over 30,000 cases of lost or miscategorized service records." But the most meaningful report came from Dr. Watson, who had been tracking the health and well-being of veterans across the galaxy. "The improvement in veteran mental health has been remarkable," she said. "When people feel valued and supported by their communities, their physical health improves too. We are seeing longer lifespans, better family relationships, and much lower rates of depression among veterans." Carol Hughes, who now served as the Foundation's legal director, shared updates on policy changes. 17 colonial governments have passed their own versions of the Frank Miller Veteran Support Act. The reforms are becoming permanent parts of how we govern ourselves. As the meeting continued, Frank found his attention drifting to the window. Outside, he could see people of all ages pushing carts through the station corridors. Some were delivering food, others were providing medical supplies, and some were just visiting elderly neighbors who needed company. "Frank," Keanu said gently, noticing his friend's distraction, "what are you thinking about?" Frank turned back to the group. "I am thinking about something Admiral Bradley said during her last visit. She told me that the cart brigade has done more to unite humanity than any government program or military campaign in history." He stood up slowly, still careful with his movements despite his improved health. "When I started delivering food 6 years ago, I was just trying to help a few families in my neighborhood. I never imagined it would become something this big." Keanu smiled. "That is exactly why it worked, Frank. You were not trying to change the world. You were just trying to help your neighbors. But when enough people help their neighbors, the world changes anyway." Frank nodded. "I have learned something important over these past months. Being a hero is not about fighting wars or making grand speeches. It is about doing small acts of kindness every day, even when no one is watching." Lisa looked up from her reports. "But people are watching now. The cart brigade symbol has become one of the most recognized images in human space. 2 figures pushing carts together, helping their community." The symbol Lisa mentioned had indeed become iconic. It appeared on government buildings, military bases, schools, and community centers across the galaxy. The simple image of 2 people working together to serve others had Come to represent the best of human nature. As the meeting ended and people began to leave, Frank and Keanu remained behind. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the sunset through the community center windows. Do you ever regret it? Frank asked suddenly. Giving up your fortune, your comfortable life, your fame? Keanu was quiet for a moment. Frank, I spent almost 200 years being famous for pretending to be other people in movies. But these past 6 months, working beside you, have been the most real and meaningful months of my entire life. He gestured toward the window, where they could see volunteers still making their rounds in the evening light. Look at what we started together. Not just the foundation or the political changes, but this. He pointed to a group of children helping their parents deliver supplies to elderly neighbors. We helped create a culture where people take care of each other. Frank smiled. My grandfather used to tell me that the measure of a person's life is not what they accomplish for themselves, but what they inspire others to accomplish. Your grandfather was a wise man, Keanu said. As they prepared to leave the community center, Frank stopped at the memorial wall that had been installed near the entrance. The wall contained photos and stories of veterans who had been helped by the foundation, as well as volunteers who had joined the cart brigade.